bring back our powerhouse panel with policy analyst and Project 21 member Donna Jackson, political analyst Mark Halperin, and former Florida State House candidate and Marine Corps veteran Matt Tito. All right, now down in Texas, Representative Michael McCall, a top Republican on the House Foreign Relations Affairs Committee, had this to say about the origins of coronavirus. Take a listen.
You know, I do think it's more likely than not it emerged out of the lab, most likely accidentally, for several reasons. Let me say this is the worst cover-up in human history that we've seen, resulting in 3.5 million deaths, creating economic devastation around the globe.
Now, Mark, I'll come to you because I think for many people, the response to this Chinese deception when it comes to the origins of COVID has been puzzling. We've got television stations running a constant death scroll across our dials, and yet when there's strong evidence that the World Health Organization knew that COVID was going from continent to continent, at the same time they said it couldn't go person to person, we somehow can't accept the fact that China was duplicitous in their dealings with the world and allowed this plague to be visited upon too many souls.
Well, it's late in coming. I mean, this is a line of inquiry that the media and others should have been investigating for over a year now, really. And the Biden administration seems to have gotten the joke, gotten the message, and they say they're going to look aggressively into this. The president says for 90 days. I bet that timetable gets moved up because there's an urgency to this now. It's a matter of public policy. It's a matter of international relations. And I think people say, well, won't get to the bottom of it. I think we might.
Now, Matt, I'll come to you because, you know, at some point there has to be a level of accountability. The press were ready to string up President Trump by his thumbs by saying that somehow his response was inept, even though Joe Biden has yet to been able to point to anything he would have done differently were he the president at the time of that COVID virus hit. What should the level of accountability be when we know for a fact that China manipulated the PPE supply chain to ensure that they were prepared and the world was left bare? And that's not just a Republican talking point or my opinion. That is based on the report of DHS and also the independent opinion of economists of all walks of life.
Well, the congressman said that this is the greatest cover-up in human history. And I don't know, it's either between this or UFOs, so we'll let the people decide on that. But in 2017, it's very interesting. Dr. Fauci said, almost as if he was a prophet, that there would be an infectious disease outbreak during the President Trump's presidency. How did he know that? I think Dr. Fauci is the key to all this. I mean, he's the one who was releasing money to fund the Wuhan lab. He knows more than he's leading on, and he's been all over the place on this issue. He's been defending China since the beginning. And Donald Trump came out right away and said this all started in the lab in China, in the Wuhan lab. And it either came out incidentally or came out on purpose. We still don't know the answer to that. So hopefully these investigations will be able to figure out exactly what happened. But the media and the Democrats got together, and they basically took the opposite stance of whatever Donald Trump said. They wanted Donald Trump to be wrong, because if they can prove that he was wrong, they could beat him in the presidential race in 2020. And it played out exactly like they wanted it to. And now that they're going back and looking into it, I think it's good. Hopefully it's a real investigation, and hopefully we get to the bottom of this. But I think Dr. Fauci is the key to a lot of this.
Now, Donna, I'll come to you because perhaps the one question that people have not asked enough is what did Dr. Fauci know and when did he know it? Because it appears that he was instrumental, for better and for worse, in providing, in many ways, the seed funding for what potentially could be one of the worst biological disasters of a generation.
Well, first of all, I think that Donald Trump and Senator Cotton are owed an apology by all of the media because they were branded as these Looney Tunes when they first came out and said we believe that that was where it started. So I think that we need to acknowledge first. And then the second thing is, Dr. Fauci turned out to be a perfect spokesperson for being able to hammer the president, then President Trump, in order to make sure that the American people were in such fear that they wanted to see change. And I think that's the big difference. I think that this was a lot of, I don't want to say it's planned, but I think it was strategically planned in the way that they use that scenario as a talking point to try to get sell Biden as this somehow, great candidate, and he wasn't. So I think he knows a lot. He always knew a lot, and at any time during this pandemic, he could have came out with that information. But it was a strategic move so that they can take control and determine the outcome of the presidency. That it was just that.
Now, Mark, want to switch gears a little bit. Obviously, coming up on the anniversary of the Tulsa riots, there have been some reports that there are threats that could potentially end up having repeats in violence or upticks in violence to, in many ways, bring back that atmosphere of fear. How do we deal with this in this current political environment where it seems as if our apprehensions about the lesser angels that in many ways stains our yesterday compromise our ability to move forward and actually build the world that most people want to be a part of?
Well, I think the state and local authorities are pretty well aware of the risks here, and they're being, as I understand it, pretty aggressive. Look, this is a piece of American history that is now much better known than it was before, and I think that's great. It's something that should be studied, understood, and resolved to say we need to learn the lessons and apply them to where we are right now.
Right now, Mark, Matt, I'll come to you because at some point you have to start understanding that all of these threads are connected. We have, in many ways, people obsessed with the racist origins of this nation. Meanwhile, we seem to have people also concerned about setting the conditions for the isolation and vilification of such sets of people as it relates to our response to COVID. We've got a store in Nashville, a hat store, in deep water after selling not vaccinated Star of David badges, comparing the vaccine passport to the Nazi practice of requesting your papers. And the store later apologized and deleted the post. But how do we get people to understand that, number one, there is no equivocation or comparison to what happened in the Holocaust, and at the same time understanding that when you start talking about giving the government unfettered access to your location, to your actual health status, that the implications are boundless?
Well, I think comparing getting the vaccine to what Nazi Germany was doing is completely wrong, and we have even people in my own party who are spewing that all over the place. And I think that kind of rhetoric needs to go away because it's just causing division amongst people. And, getting the vaccine, whether you do it or you don't do it, I believe that's completely your choice. That's up to you. The government has no business in understanding whether you did it or not and knowing. But going back to the Tulsa race riots, I used to live in Tulsa. I understand the racial division within that city. You have Joe Biden going down there tomorrow. This was an incident 100 years ago where you had 300 Black people who were killed, 10,000 were put out to the streets and homeless, businesses were destroyed. I think it's a great thing Joe Biden's going down there. What I don't want it to happen is it turns into, a push for critical race theory and telling everybody they're racist. I hope it becomes a healing event where the city can heal, they can move forward, they can put it in the past, and we can all learn from the history lesson of what happened 100 years ago.
Now, Donna, I'll come to you because to that point, you try to find this common ground. It seems to me that there are more Americans who want to learn from history than repeat history, and yet the message from people who say that they want justice seems to always, in many ways, vilify and isolate the people they claim we are trying to have reconciliation with. How do we put the rhetoric to the side and focus on the message and the hope and the aspirations that define the more perfect union we've always been trying to build?
History is history, and it's about what the human spirit can overcome and endure. But I want to say something because a lot of African Americans and even liberal white Americans blame white people for a lot of the disparities that you see today. That's wrong. What we have to recognize is integration cut two ways. Now, on the one hand, it allowed African Americans the opportunity to go to white establishments, go to white schools, all of that. But the other way it cut is that that Black businesses were not guaranteed customers because people had choices. And what happened now, as well as then, is that
Right.
African Americans as a whole failed to innovate and adapt to the current economy, economic economy. It wasn't that is racist, systematic racism. It's about innovation. It's about being dynamic and being able to adapt to the current situation. It's the reason why immigrants come over to this country and surpass Black people, because they're not taking advantage of all the capitalistic opportunities that we have. It's very difficult. We're still fighting. We're still living off of a 1960s agenda where we're fighting for
Right.
separate but equal schools, where the world has moved on. African Americans have not embraced the financial opportunities and the educational opportunities that are available. And that's not anybody's fault but our own.
Right.
And we need to have personal responsibility for that.
And I think to that point, people have to remember there were plenty of Black places that could have been burned down. The reason they burned down Tulsa was because the Black people there were thriving in spite of the conditions that existed and independent of any type of economic support that they needed from outside their own community. What was required was already internal. Gonna have to leave it there. Thanks to our powerhouse panel.